Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This report contains sensitive information from confidential therapy sessions that have become part of an ongoing investigation. What's in these therapy notes that has the entire courtroom stunned into silence? What did Cassie's therapist document in 2014 that was so disturbing it compelled a medical professional to break their sacred oath of confidentiality, and why are legal experts saying these notes could be the final piece of evidence needed to seal the case in a stunning development that has sent shockwaves through both the entertainment industry and mental health community. Dr. Rebecca Winters, a respected therapist with over 20 years of experience, has made the extraordinary decision to come forward with her session notes from 2014 notes that were never meant to see the light of day. She didn't appear as a celebrity friend. She didn't come as a paid expert witness. She arrived as a medical professional who had reached a breaking point, carrying a therapy journal that reportedly contains detailed accounts of abuse, so severe that several jurors were seen visibly shaking as the contents were read aloud. I've upheld confidentiality my entire career, Dr. Winters stated, her voice unwavering despite the gravity of her decision. But there comes a point where silence becomes complicity. The decision to breach therapist-patient confidentiality wasn't made lightly. In fact, such a breach violates the very foundation of therapeutic practice. But as the details of these sessions have emerged, many are asking, what could have been so horrific that would compel a therapist to risk her entire career and reputation? If you're finding this information valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more breaking developments in this ongoing case. The federal courtroom fell into complete silence as Dr. Rebecca Winters was sworn, and the overhead lights seemed unusually harsh, illuminating every line of concern on her face. Attorneys on both sides sat perfectly still, their legal pads untouched. Even the judges' usual stoic expression had given way to undisguised attentiveness. Nobody expected a therapist to voluntarily break confidentiality. The room was tense, eyes focused on the witness stand, until Dr. Winters removed a worn leather journal from her bag. Gasps echoed. Even the judge froze. No announcement, no pre-written statement. Just Dr. Winters opening to a page marked July 18th, 2014, with hands that trembled slightly but purposefully. Until that moment, Dr. Winters had maintained absolute silence about her former client. But something had changed. Maybe it was watching Cassie's testimony on television. Maybe it was seeing the defense team attempt to discredit her former patient. Maybe it was realizing that her notes contained corroborating evidence from 8 years before any public allegations. Whatever it was, Dr. Winters was done keeping silent. She wasn't taking a stand as a celebrity. She was there as a healthcare provider who documented a pattern of abuse long before the public knew anything was wrong. And when she began to read from those pages, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear. Because what Dr. Winters revealed about the psychological control, the patterns of isolation, and the documented physical injuries wasn't just explosive. It was a warning that had been locked away for nearly a decade. While the abuse continued, it started like any other day of the trial. The room buzzed with low conversations, the press hunched in their designated rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for the next scheduled witness, an audio technician who had worked on several music projects. But when the bailiff announced Dr. Rebecca Winters, instead the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a stunt. But the way Dr. Winters walked purposefully to the stand, her expression grave but determined, told everyone this was real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and the defense team, who'd been casually reviewing documents, suddenly looked alarmed, frantically flipping through their witness list. Dr. Winters took the oath, no eye contact with anyone. She didn't even glance at the defense table. I understand the seriousness of what I'm doing today, Dr. Winters began. I spent 23 years honoring the confidentiality of my patients, but there are rare circumstances Where the law recognizes a duty to break that confidence, the judge allowed it, and from that moment on the entire trial shifted. Because what D.R. Winters was about to say wasn't part of any media narrative. It wasn't a social media leak. It was something that haunted her for years. When asked to explain her presence, D.R. Winters explained that in most states, therapists have a legal obligation known as duty to warn when they believe someone is in imminent danger. While that duty typically applies to immediate threats, Dr. Winters explained that watching recent testimony convinced her that her notes contained critical evidence of long-term abuse that corroborated the current allegations. Cassie began therapy with me in early 2014, D.R. Winters explained she initially sought help for what she described as anxiety and insomnia. It was only in our third session that the true nature of her situation began to emerge. The prosecutor approached with caution. D.R. Winters, can you tell us why, after all these years, you've chosen to come forward now? D.R. Winters looked directly at the jury. Because the patterns documented in my notes from 2014 are identical to what's being described in this courtroom today. Because I watched the defense team suggest that these allegations were recently fabricated, and because I have contemporaneous documentation that proves otherwise, the defense attorney jumped to his feet objecting vigorously, but the judge, after a brief sidebar, allowed D.R. Winters to continue with carefully limited testimony. I brought my original session notes, she said, holding up the leather-bound journal. These are the contemporaneous records I kept during our sessions from February 2014 through November 2014. I've kept these notes secured for nearly a decade. She said, I've achieved success in my field. I've published 2 books on trauma recovery. I've testified in other cases when subpoenaed, but none of that matters compared to what I documented in these pages. She turned slightly toward the courtroom. These aren't just notes, they're a contemporaneous record of suffering. D.R. Winters told the courtroom that it started like many therapeutic relationships do with surface-level concerns. It came through physician referral. The way they framed it, it was supposed to be about managing anxiety and performance stress, standard entertainment industry struggles. I'd been recommended because I had experience with high-profile clients, so I didn't question it. But the moment Cassie entered her first session, D.R. Winters knew something was off. My waiting room has a private entrance and exit. All phones were required to be turned off. The blinds were always drawn. The second I asked about her support system, she froze completely. That should have been the first red flag. They said it was for privacy reasons, to prevent paparazzi intrusion. But it felt like something else, like they didn't want anything getting out. She was progressing through therapy very slowly. The office atmosphere became tense whenever certain topics arose. There were unexplained cancellations after particularly revealing sessions. It felt like someone was always watching. D.R. Winters said that after 3 months and 12 sessions, Cassie finally broke down during an appointment. She rolled up her sleeve to show me bruising on her upper arm and wrist. She said something like, he says, this is love, that if I speak about this, no one would understand our relationship. And she smiled. That smile, it wasn't warmth, it was fear. The courtroom remained absolutely silent as Dr. Winters turned pages in her journal. I documented physical injuries in at least 7 sessions, bruising on upper arms, wrists, once around the neck, a sprained wrist explained away as a workout injury. She read directly from an entry dated May 30th, 2014. Patient arrived 10 minutes late. Appeared disoriented, visible bruising on left cheekbone, concealed with makeup. When asked about injury, patient became agitated, stated, I deserve it for embarrassing impatient, reported being denied sleep for 36 hours. As punishment drive, Winters paused, visibly collecting herself. In my professional opinion, what I was observing was consistent with intimate partner violence and coercive control. She continued reading entries that documented Cassie's declining weight, increasing isolation from friends and family, and constant monitoring of her whereabouts. July 18th, 2014 patient. Reports her phone and computer are regularly checked, states nothing is private, and he has people everywhere. Patient expresses fear that therapy sessions are not confidential despite my assurances. The most disturbing revelation came when Dr. Winters read from a September 2014 entry. Patient disclosed being forced to engage in sexual activities with others while partner watch, states she had no choice, and that refusal resulted in physical assault and threats to her career and family. Patient exhibiting signs of severe trauma. Response: Dr. Winters said she followed Cassie into a concerning discussion during their 8th session, thinking they were going to address her anxiety management techniques. Instead, what she heard shook her to the core. There were detailed accounts of psychological manipulation, some involving high-profile industry names, some described as friends of family. There were others who participated in the abuse through their silence. And the primary abuser, he was consistently described as controlling every aspect of her life, monitoring her therapy sessions, and demanding detailed reports. Afterward, she paused, swallowing hard. I didn't know how to help her leave. And that was the point. Once you're in that kind of relationship, you're trapped. Dr. Winters continued, her voice steady but hollow. A few days after a particularly revealing session in October 2014, I received a call block number. All the voice said was some patient information should remain confidential for everyone's benefit. Then they hung up. She thought it was just a coincidence until an envelope arrived at her office. It was unmarked. Inside was a detailed transcript of her session with Cassie from the previous day. I almost didn't look, but I did. It was a verbatim transcript of my session. I don't record my sessions, but somehow every word was captured. There was a voice note attached to the transcript saying, "Therapy is more effective when it reinforces the right lessons." Dr. Winters testified that the fear she felt in that moment made her understand what Cassie was experiencing. I realized my office had been bugged. My patient wasn't just describing paranoia. She was describing reality. In their final session, Cassie arrived with sunglasses covering most of her face. When she finally removed them, Dr. Winters documented a severe black eye. When I suggested we discuss safety planning, she packed up her things and said there is no safe place. That was our last session. She never returned. She said that's when the manipulation began. I get calls asking about Cassie's treatment. I declined to discuss her. Then suddenly I received notification that my office lease wouldn't be renewed. People I worked with for years stopped referring patients. Rumors started online that I was unethical, that I was incompetent, that I was unstable. I knew it was pressure. He didn't need to say it. He just made it clear that silence was a cost of peace. And so for years, Dr. Winters said nothing. She moved her practice, rebuilt her reputation, focused on helping other patients. But every time I saw Cassie in the media appearing alongside him, looking increasingly thin and withdrawn, I thought, if I'm still being silenced, what is happening to her? She looked around the courtroom. He didn't just ruin people's careers, he made them fear telling the truth. And that, Dr. Winters said, was what finally brought me to court. Dr. Winters paused, glanced at the jury, and leaned close to the mic. It wasn't just the threats, that was the leash. She said from that moment on, everything she felt like it had strings attached to it. She explained that warnings would come through unexpected channels, demands to focus on stress management rather than relationship dynamics. When she tried to refer Cassie to a domestic violence specialist, things shifted behind the scenes. I'd make that recommendation on Monday, and by Thursday I'd find out my invited speaking engagement had been mysteriously canceled. She said this didn't happen once or twice. It became a pattern. He didn't have to threaten people directly. He had systems that did it for him. His network reached into medical offices, building management, professional associations. He knew who to call. He knew how to make problems appear out of thin air. and How to Make Opportunities Vanish Just as Fast, D.R. Winters' voice dropped to a quieter, deeper tone. I stayed quiet for almost 10 years. I convinced myself it wasn't my story to tell, but then the trial started, and I watched defense attorneys claim these allegations were new fabrications. She said the first time she heard them dismiss the abuse allegations as recent inventions, she didn't immediately react. Then I got a call not from my colleagues, but from another former patient who had also been in his orbit. They said, "Dear Winters are saying no one knew before 2022, but you knew you documented it. People are talking." She described feeling like the floor had dropped from under her. I didn't even know my therapy notes would be admissible, but once I consulted with an attorney about the limits of confidentiality in cases of documented abuse, everything started to connect. D.R. Winters said she stayed up all night reviewing her old notes, the detailed accounts of control, the documented injuries, the fear that was recorded in session after. Session, it was all there in black and white, dated and signed after each session. This wasn't new, this was a decade-old pattern. She said the breaking point wasn't fear, it was moral obligation. I realized that if I didn't speak now, my silence would become my legacy, and I couldn't live without. My ethics as a therapist include confidentiality, but they also include a duty to protect. I had failed to protect once I couldn't fail again. She told the court she contacted the prosecution team herself. I told them, "I have contemporaneous medical documentation from 2014. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them." She looked at the jury. I wasn't just a therapist with notes. I was a witness to the early stages of what would become almost a decade of documented abuse. Then she looked at the defense table, this time with unwavering certainty. "And you knew exactly what you were doing when you claimed these allegations were new." For her final statement, the judge allowed D.R. Winters to speak directly to the court. She stood from the witness chair, walked a few feet closer, and looked at everyone present. "You built an empire out of fear," she began. "You called it protection, you called it privacy, you called it industry standard, but all you built was a prison." The defense team didn't respond. They sat there motionless, their client whispering urgently in their ear. D.R. Winters didn't blink. "I saw what you did to Cassie. I saw what you did to other patients who feared you. I heard the things you said about them. When you thought they weren't listening, you broke people for power." Then D.R. Winters pulled something from her pocket, a business card. "This was my card from 2014, the one I gave Cassie with my personal number written on the back. She never called it. That's the level of fear she lived with." She held it up for the court. "That's the person she used to be." D.R. Winters turned to the jury. "If you think this is just about therapy notes or me or one relationship, you're not seeing the whole picture. This is about a system designed to silence victims while abusers remain protected. And if we don't tear it down, it will keep going." Then she faced the defense. "One last time, you once told one of my patients that loyalty means keeping secrets, while healing means speaking truth." She walked back to gather her notes and exited the courtroom without looking back. And the defendant, he sat there pale-faced, unblinking, his fingers shaking, because for the first time in decades, he wasn't the one controlling the room. When D.R. Winters stepped down from the witness stand, she didn't look like someone who had won anything. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running. The courtroom was still tense, almost unsure how to breathe. Again, even the judge looked shaken. Some of the jurors had tears in their eyes, and the defense team, for the first time in the entire trial, looked like they had nothing left to say. D.R. Winters didn't speak to press. When she exited, she didn't wave, didn't posture. She walked out the front of the courthouse with her head held high, but her shoulders carried the weight of 10 years of knowing and being unable to help. When asked later by reporters if she felt relieved, she reportedly responded, "Relief isn't the right word. This is about accountability, not my feelings." But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to react. The mental health community went into a quiet panic ethics. Boards called emergency meetings. Professional associations issued statements. Therapists who had once dismissed abuse allegations were now issuing boilerplate statements of regret and concern. Behind closed doors, legal teams were activated. PR firms sent internal memos urging clients to distance themselves from the accused. And while many tried to pretend they were shocked, the internet was already doing what it does best, resurfacing old interviews where the abuse was hiding in plain sight. Old photos were being re-examined with new understanding. Red carpet appearances where Cassie appeared withdrawn now looked like evidence of control, and most painfully, videos where she flinched at sudden movements were being viewed through an entirely new lens. Fans weren't just shocked, they were furious that someone like Cassie had to suffer alone for so long. Furious that for years her complaints were dismissed as the exaggerations of a disgruntled ex, and furious that the system had stayed quiet while documenting her abuse. The era of silence was finally ending, and as this story continues to develop, we'll bring you the latest updates. If you found this report informative, please like and subscribe to our channel, because when the powerful try to bury the truth, it's our job to keep digging until justice is served.